Today on Applied AI Builders, we sit down with Bonnie Yu, former director of product at Smartsheet and senior product manager at Twitch, SurveyMonkey, and Microsoft. Bonnie won Most Innovative Use of AI in Cohort 6 with her project Write With Me for Kids. It is a storytelling chatbot designed to help young kids fall in love with writing. In this conversation, you'll hear how Bonnie crafted a comic book inspired UI using AI image generation, why she treats Claude Code as her developer rather than her designer, and the biggest lessons she learned after building her first AI app end to end. And stay to the end. Bonnie shares how she evaluates a creative AI agent where right answers don't always exist and how she ties those evals back to real user outcomes. And with that, let's jump into the conversation. Bonnie, welcome.
Thanks for having me on, guys. I've spent over a decade leading product at different companies like Amazon, Smartsheet, Microsoft. These days, I work as a product coach and a product consultant. I mostly focus my time on helping PMs upskill and grow into senior roles. My main mission, though, is really around helping people design lives that make them happy. So that's not just about, getting better at your job and getting promotions, but it also means, how do you navigate parenthood or how do you even deal with financial worries? So, in this kind of process of being a good coach, I also want to upskill myself and keep up with all the really cool AI trends.
That's awesome, Bonnie. And parenthood is never easy. And we'd love to get understand more details about your AI tutor and what your product looks like. Excited as well as a mom, and would love to see and hear more about your experiences and what you've done. So I'd love to dive in further and see what's in for us today.
So let me give some quick context on why I decided to work on this. So my son, who just started second grade, was having to do a lot of writing assignments, and he just absolutely hated it. He was saying, "Mommy, I hate writing," which was like really sad as a mom because he just loved storytelling. So that was the motivation for making this storytelling app. Right now, I'm actually sharing my screen. So what you're seeing in front of you guys is the app, and I can give you a quick demo of it. There's actually two different features, one called Fun Facts and Story Writing, but for the sake of time, I'll focus just on this story writing experience that I have here. So we have a chatbot who asks the student what kind of story they want to write today, what kind of topic seems fun to them, because we really want it to be personalized to the interest of the student. So let's say the student is interested in writing a space story today. So you can write space and then you can input that. And so as the chatbot is thinking, I am actually changing the background to match the topic. So you'll notice the background feels a lot more space-like. You'll notice the characters also change. Now they're wearing, a spacesuit so that it feels more immersive for the child. So as that happens, the chatbot came up with the story for the space story. And right now, I don't know if you guys can read it, but it's a story about an astronaut who's searching the galaxy for hidden treasures. The child can then name this astronaut. So maybe they name the astronaut Maya, and they're going to give some details for this Maya astronaut. Maybe Maya loves solving puzzles. And so what the AI will do is actually incorporate that as part of the story. So it talks about how Maya is going to be floating through the vast galaxy and she loves solving puzzles. That's kind of something that the student mentioned. And there's sort of this question at the end of like, hey, what do you think, is going to happen as Maya is looking for this treasure? The student can then write something about what happens in this story. So they might say, Maya ask a friend for, help. And we can actually misspell help here just to illustrate the next part, where you'll be able to see the AI also provides some real-time feedback for the writing. So you'll see the AI says, you could make that sentence even better by saying, Maya asked her friend for help. This corrects the spelling of HALP to HELP. And it can provide grammar feedback. It can help you write the sentence better. It just depends on what the LM decides. And then it'll incorporate that next part into the story, the next part of the story as well. And you keep kind of have this turn-by-turn interaction until the story ends. So that's the general flow of the app.
That's beautiful, Bonnie. How did you get that UX? It looks amazing because it's kind of contextualizing the story and the UX to it. So how did you do that?
I actually took a pretty different approach from what a lot of people do with vibe coding when they're doing a product. Well, usually when people are vibe coding a product, they'll go to their favorite tool, whether it's Lovable, Bolt, or whatever, and they'll enter a prompt. They'll have like very common phrases like this in a very clean and modern way. Or I've seen like a YouTube app where it was recommended you can say like, create a design that's approved by an Apple designer. That's very fast, right? And you'll get a design very quickly, but what ends up happening is a lot of the designs end up looking very similar. You'll see like a design that has like a lot of white space, has rounded corners, has softened outlines for buttons, icons also do that. And so that's really that modern design, right? That Apple design that, is very popular right now. But for me, I wanted something different. I wanted something that felt like a comic book that would be fun for kids, right? My son just loves storybooks. So that was kind of the vision I had. In my head, I could already see characters with chat bubbles going back and forth and co-creating the story. And so what I actually did was I used products like ChatGPT and Gemini to generate the design mockups. So here we have Gemini, and I guess now they have this to make it easier to create an image. And you can upload files. And I just picked posters of different things that I thought would be fun looking. So these are some posters from the Spider-Man Across the Universe movie. I don't know if you guys have seen it. But here I'm just adding some posters from there. And then I'm going to put in my prompt, which basically says, hey, you're an amazing UX designer. I want you to generate a visual mock-up inspired by these attached screenshots. And I also gave it some apps. And then I actually wrote out the use case for my app. So I can paste in this prompt, and then Gemini is going to start generating this image. And image generation does take a few seconds. So while it's doing that, I can show you some of the other images I generated as I was working on this app.
Actually, before you go there, I wanted to go back to your UI design that you had, because it's actually very unique. As you mentioned, it's not a cut and dry. It's hard to describe, but when you look at a website nowadays, you can pretty much say, oh, that was Lovable or that was Bolt. You have basically the rounded corners of cards that you put together. It's either going to be white background with some kind of text and some kind of emoji. But the one that really stood out was that this is unlike anything that we see from vibe coding, which is really the reason why I was like, oh my gosh, we have to figure out how Bonnie did this portion. But I wanted to dive down a little bit deeper on your app where it was the yellow pieces that are highlighted. What does it allow the student to do with the highlighted yellow text?
Yeah, so the highlighted yellow text is actually the more complex vocabulary for the student. It's probably very easy for you, like incredible, analytical, mysterious, but we're thinking about first grader here. So the text is actually highlighted based on their vocabulary level. So I'm highlighting what's considered more challenging vocabulary. And then at the end of the story, I actually ask them vocabulary questions. It'll be based on what's highlighted there. And that's something that the prompt actually addresses. I actually used AI to generate a list of vocabulary words. That would be challenging for my son. But it was tailored for my son. You can't actually just build like a vocabulary list for first grader. You can, but the words that they came up with was really simple. It wasn't really challenging for my son. So I actually had to give it a sample list of vocabulary words and expand on that. And then from there, what happens is that I give the list of vocabulary words to the LLM to choose which word to incorporate into this space story. So that's kind of how that actually happens in the back end. Because like I said, if you just say write a story and make sure to include challenging words, a lot of the words are just really simple. It was really repetitive. So I needed to actually have the vocabulary list separate. And then I would manage the vocabulary list. Because if you keep doing more stories, I want to be able to say the student has already seen these 4 words before, right? And they've already answered the vocabulary questions correctly, right? So let's do a more challenging set or whatever, right? So I actually manage that outside of the LLM.
So does it tell the student that you need to pay attention to this vocabulary word because you will be quizzed on it later on? Or how does this make an impact to the student that they should be cognizant of this new vocabulary word?
It's just more features I haven't built yet. So what I wanted to be able to do for like the bolded words was actually make it so that if you hover over it, it would read the word out for you. Because like for a first grader, they may not even be able to read the word. So for the bolded words, I was going to make it so that it can read it for you, right? So you know that, hey, you can get a little bit more information about these words. Maybe I kind of give some information about what the actual definition is at this point in time. But yeah, it's just to let them know, hey, these are like words to pay more attention to, basically.
So that's more like an MVP plus where you go over it, it blows it up, and you can have a pronunciation, for example, plus a definition. So it can be very similar to flashcards when we were kids, where you would flip through vocabularies. Okay, that makes sense.
So that's kind of how that works. I don't know if we want to go back to some of the visual design mockups that I was using to explore for what I actually ended up building. But this is what Gemini came up with after I gave the Spider-Man Across the Universe posters and gave it the prompt. So what you'll see is it's very different than, a lot of the lovable type apps, just from a layout perspective, right? Font perspective, colors, just all around it is quite different. There's also a bunch of like different assets being used. And I can show you, I don't think I showed you guys some of the other ones that I was exploring, but I generated this one. This one is the basis, I think, for what I ended up building. There's this one and this one. So they're all quite different in terms of like the style and the feeling of it. And so you can use a LLM to explore different designs this way.
And do you have a standard set of themes here, Bonnie? Or is it something that your backend flow comes up with based on the story it's going to create at that moment? Or is it just going to rely on a few standard images or sets that you have created so far?
Yeah, so the characters and the themes are pre-generated. And what happens is after you pick the topic, it changes to that set of characters and background. And actually, there's a little setting button here. It's not very cleaned up, but I can actually force it to change into different themes, basically. So I used ChatGPT and Gemini to generate all the different characters as well.
But the image generation portion of the LLM, correct? So you're using Imagen or DALL-E, or what of ChatGPT and Gemini?
I mean, I'm just using Nano Banana from Gemini and then the image gen from ChatGPT. Their whatever model they are using right now. So here, for example, if I wanted to create the characters, all I did was I basically picked the style I want. So this is the style that I ended up choosing, and I have a prompt that tells ChatGPT to create a character sheet, and it creates a character sheet for this boy character in all the different like themes that I have chosen. So these are all pre-generated because like image generation takes time, not instantaneous. If it was faster, you can kind of do it in real time. But because you're watching this, you're like, okay, it's going to take like a few seconds. It takes some time to generate. And then from there, I just pull the assets in the app, and I just select whichever character I want based on the theme.
So you mean you pull it in like a JPEG, for example, or however the image format you mean?
Yeah, basically.
So there's so many image generation LLMs out there. How did you down select to be using ChatGPT, which I'm assuming is DALL-E, or Gemini from Nano Banana? I believe the king used to be Midjourney.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, honestly, I just was already paying for ChatGPT. I tested it and it worked okay for my use case, so I decided to use it. I did use Midjourney before, a long time ago, and it was able to produce character sheets as well. So with AI, and I think this theme is going to come up again, things change so fast that when you're actually in the moment of needing to create images, you're probably just going to have to test some of these different products yourself and see if it comes up with something you like, right? So here is the character sheet that ChatGPT came up with for, different themes.
So this is amazing. And we always highlight the positives of, oh, this is so great. This is what it can do. But are there any negatives or drawbacks to this approach?
This particular approach for design is actually very slow. It just takes a lot of time to explore all the different options to create all the different assets, right? As you can see, it took a while to, generate this one character sheet. And if you don't like it, you're going to have to run it again, change the prompt and test different things. I kind of did one poster, but when I was exploring this, I tried a lot of different kid shows, basically, like Octonauts and all that, just to see which feeling I liked. And you can change the prompt to suggest different type of maybe layout option or what the use case looked like. And so when you put all that together, it just takes a whole bunch of time to do all this stuff. But I had a very specific vision in mind, and I really wanted this to be really fun for my son, so I was willing to put in that kind of time. But if at work, you need to decide when it's time to explore and take that kind of time to do all this image generation, or if you just want to, rely on a prompt and say you just want this clean and modern design so you can test a simple idea.
Understood. So we spent a lot of time on the prompting portion, the image generation of it, but what I really am interested in is the Claude Code portion of it. So I know this is going to be a little bit on the tech side, but how do you use Claude Code to build it so uniquely that it doesn't look like a canned version from Lovable or Bolt or V0?
So in terms of how to make it look different, I kind of already went through that. That's the design portion. Once you have that visual mockup you want, you're going to, ask Claude to basically build that UI. And obviously there's some prompt tricks in terms of what's the most effective way to use Claude. And I can show you guys some of that in terms of just good hygiene when you use Claude Code. But really, I already walked through, first figure out what your design is, figure out what that visual mockup is, and then I asked Claude to basically build it.
So Claude Code wasn't really any of the generation as far as what you see on the UX. Claude Code is more so taking all the generations from ChatGPT or Gemini via the meta prompting and then putting it together into the product. That's where you use Claude Code. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I use Claude Code like the developer, and then I use the image generation like my designer. So again, it's a very different flow from what most people recommend because it's very slow. But like I mentioned, it's just like a way for me to explore. But yes, Claude Code was not my designer. Claude Code was my developer.
And how do you store these images, Bonnie, so your Claude Code can retrieve it? Are you using something like RAG or how does this stitch together?
Are you asking about how I got Claude Code to use the visual mockup to build the UI, or how does the app use the character icons to include in the app? Because those are two different questions.
The first one, I would say.
So firstly, this is, if you're looking at my screen, this is VS Code. It's an IDE. And so within VS Code, at the bottom here, you have access to your terminal. And then usually when you're using like a coding agent, you just type the name of the coding agent. You type Claude. Gemini is also a coding agent, but here you can, I just rename it to Claude because I want to know it's Claude. But from there, I don't know what this picture is, but basically you can drag this particular file. So on the left-hand side is basically my folder directory, and it has all the files in there. And you just drag and drop it in, and it has the location. And then you can just tell Claude Code, hey, here's a design, right, of my storytelling app. It would take me much longer to write a nice prompt, but can you build the UI based on this, image? Something of that nature. I'm not going to do this right now, but
all I was trying to understand is that are these images that are generated is still part of your code structure itself, though you generate it and then use it. It's like plug and play, right? They are two different processes. You're not doing it on the go. You have these characters and the images which you've created upfront by using ChatGPT or Claude. That is something that you're adding to your Claude code in your code itself, and using that by what you showed now, like you're dragging and dropping that and giving it a prompt to come up with a story. Is my understanding right so far?
At the highest level, yes. I mean, just to simplify, so for the task of, hey, I want to build this UI, all I'm doing is Claude Code is like my developer. And I'm just giving the developer Claude Code a prompt, and I'm just giving him the location of the design. And then he builds the front to end based on the location of the file. Just reads the file and it's like, I'm going to build this. Then the second part, in terms of the icons and assets, that's just normal app building, right? In the sense that I have a assets folder, should be in the front end part. Actually, I don't even know if you can read it from here, but there is an assets folder right here. And then there's some character assets, and the app itself is going to be pulling these images when the theme switches. So that is the logic within the app. Now, I used Claude to build that logic by telling Claude, hey, there is this folder of all these like images of this bear character, right? I had to put it in my prompt, right? Like, go to this folder, you'll find all these like images, and then build that based on this, right? So that's part of the prompt part. Does that make sense?
Yes, of course. That helps. Thank you, Bonnie.
So Bonnie, I have to ask though, if you're using Claude Code to do this coding, if somebody were to use Lovable or Bolt, it seems to be less intimidating than looking at VS Code. So could you tell a little bit more experience about why not Lovable or Bolt?
So there's a few different reasons. The first is, like, I don't know if you've gotten this sense yet, I'm a little bit frugal. I was already paying for the Claude Pro plan, and so that comes with Claude Code for free. So that's first, saving money. The second is I found the agent, the coding agent for Claude Code, more effective than the agent for Lovable. When I was trying to make this decision, I actually tested both Lovable and Claude Code on building like this very simple personal finance budgeting app. And, you know, Lovable was really quick. It created this modern interface really, really quickly, but it got stuck when it was parsing the spend data I was giving it. And I tried to work with the agent to fix it, but it wasn't fixing it. It was just like stuck there. And I think because I wasn't paying for it at the time, I also couldn't edit the code myself. Whereas with Claude Code, you know, one, the agent was able to write the code correctly to parse the data right away. So it was able to one-shot that. And then two, like, if it couldn't, because this is all in my local machine, these are just like all my files, like I could write the code because I've written in Python before. So I could write the parsing data if I wanted to. So for me, it was less restricting, and it was just a better agent in that way. And then from a technology perspective, Lovable and Bolt are, you know, JavaScript only. And so as I mentioned, I've written in Python, so I wanted the backend to be Python so that, you know, if there's any issues, like I could read the code and I'd be able to debug it more quickly than if it was with JavaScript. So it was just sort of like this flexibility in being able to choose which language to build with, whereas Lovable, Bolt, and Replit, they tie you to certain technologies, which is great for some people. If you're using Replit and Lovable, you can already deploy and publish the app within the platform. But with Claude Code, for example, you know, this is all local. If I want to publish it, I basically had to buy a plan with Render to do the hosting part of it.
For me, this is actually pretty daunting. If I'm looking at this code, because I'm coming from a hardware background, I don't feel Claude Code is really for beginners. Do you have any kind of tips for somebody to get started? Because it is actually pretty daunting looking at all of this.
It's probably more daunting right now because this is an active project. So it has a lot of code. There's, a lot of files there. When you first get started, it's going to be an empty file, right? It's an empty directory, and you're just starting from scratch. And then I think it'll feel a little bit less daunting from that perspective. But I think, you know, some comfortability with like VS Code and Terminal probably helps. Otherwise, I could just walk you guys through like a quick example of how you might want to work with Claude Code. Maybe it might ease your feelings about using Claude Code a little bit.
Certainly. But before that, are there any top 3 tips you can give before we dive into it? Claude Code for beginners?
There's just a ton of blog posts on Claude Code basics already, so I don't really want to rehash all of that. I think the most important things to know about Claude Code right now is like 1, using Markdown files, 2, using plan mode and combine that with the think harder keyword, and then 3, Claude.md and other project Markdown files.
Got it. So you talk about this planning mode. Could you describe a little bit more about this planning mode?
Yeah, so can you guys see my terminal okay?
Yes.
I was like trying to figure out, I think these kind of pasted this when I did that. Sorry. Let me get rid of this one. So yeah, I'm already in Claude Code, and you can shift tab. I'm on Windows. I don't know if it's true on Mac, but if you shift tab, you'll notice right under the input, it changed a little bit. And here is right now it says accept edits on, and if you shift tab again, it goes to something called plan mode.
I did not know that. That's cool.
So once you're in plan mode, you can put in a prompt. And let's say I wanted to create some admin UI to manage all the different prompts for my app. So I, wrote a prompt beforehand. Let me just pull it up. So this prompt is a little bit long. But what I usually do in plan mode is I want to work with the agent to there's many different things you can work with the agent on, but one thing I do is work with it to make sure it's implementing it in the direction that I want it to. But other things you can do in plan mode is trying to refine your product specs, right, the features for your project. In this case, I've already decided on like what the features for this admin UI is going to look like. So what I'm trying to do is make sure that it's going to implement it the way I want. I'm asking it to do some research, and I want it to output it in a Markdown file. So here I'm saying, you can see just in the prompt itself, like recommend the architecture, the data model, the API contract, etc. Sometimes if you're working on bugs, like I might even ask it to like come up with like 3 or 4 hypotheses on why this is happening, or come up with like 3 or 4 potential bug fixes. Because like sometimes like if you don't work with it, it might implement something in a really like complex way that is going to make it a lot harder in the future to work with. So anyway, I tell it to basically do this this research for me, and then I want it to, in terms of the format, deliver it in the Markdown file with the sections above. There's some specific things I ask it to do, and then I say, please think harder.
So what's the output that we would get then in this planning mode?
Well, so I want it to basically put it into this. I said at the end to save it in, I think it's here, in this folder as a new Markdown file. Okay.
And this is essentially brainstorming with Claude, right? To understand how to go about building it and making it clear in terms of what you want to build. How is it different from brainstorming with either ChatGPT or Claude outside the Claude Code?
I mean, you can certainly do that as well. The difference is that right now with Claude Code, it already has access to like my app's directory and all the files. So in order to figure out like how to implement it, you'll see that, like, I don't know if you can read it, but it's actually trying to read the different files. So it knows like where to implement this particular feature.
Okay, so it has a lot more context than using another LLM to brainstorm.
Yeah, so one is it can access all the different files so that it can like actually suggest a more detailed implementation plan, right? Because if you're using ChatGPT, like it can give you just sort of a high level outline of potentially like how you might build something, but then it won't know like already existing functions you have, like already existing maybe UI components you can use, because it doesn't necessarily, it may not be connected to your GitHub. There's ways around that you could upload it, but like why would you? And then when I show you the Claude.md, you can also give it very specific instructions about kind of how to write the code, etc. Like maybe there's a certain style you want it to be written in. So there's a lot of things that you can tell it beforehand. So you can set up a bunch of stuff. I mean, you could do that in ChatGPT too. There are always ways to get things done. It's just a lot faster this way.
So Bonnie, it sounds like if you have Claude Code in your local directory, it has full context to provide an accurate solution, is what I'm understanding.
Well, it has full context of the local directory you're giving it to, in the sense that it can access any of these files. I don't want to use the word context because Claude Code has a 200,000 context window, and it doesn't read all your code files right away. Like it's not just stored in its context window immediately. What it needs to do, and what it spends time doing, is it goes into the files that it thinks is important and reads it when you've given it the prompt.
So does that mean it understands what you're using or what you have for your back end, what you have for your front end, and how can I tie it in all together? Is that what you're trying to say?
I think we're talking about a few different things, so maybe the conversation is getting a little confusing because of that. Let's see. Claude Code. So let me jump to some of the other cool things about Claude Code right now that you can do. There is this Claude.md file. And what Claude.md, what happens is that when you start up this Claude session, what it will do is it will read Claude.md. And in Claude.md, you can give it context at that point about your app, right? And so here, it's a little bit more complex, Claude.md. But this project overview is a English tutoring app for elementary school students, right? It's built with Python, with fast API backend, and vanilla JavaScript frontend. And it tells Claude to read some of the other Markdown files I have in my directory. So I have something called a memory bank. And so Claude will actually go in and read something called systempattern.md. So this Markdown file actually has some system patterns that it needs to follow when it is building the app. So as an example, my prompts right now are centralized in a specific JSON format. So whenever, we're going to add a new prompt or whatever, make sure to put it in, follow what I've written here, basically. So there's a specific schema that it has to follow. And so that's how Claude can get context about your app for every session. Because in my Claude.md, I say, hey, go read some of these other files. So it goes and reads, the system patterns. I have a spec.md that actually has all the information. So that's how it has context about the app, and the app in terms of the product perspective and the app in terms of the tech perspective. And then from there, when you actually give it a prompt to build something or to come up with a way to implement something, it will basically, like it's basically doing right now, right? It needs to read some of the specific files. So in this case, I guess it needs to read contentmanager.my. And it will then come up with a plan after it's read some of the specific code in order to give a more specific implementation.
So does the plan that gets generated end up being the Markdown files?
So the plan doesn't have to be in a Markdown file. It will usually just print it out in the terminal. However, I want to create it in a Markdown file. So I'm asking it to do that part as part of my prompt.
And is that for reusability? Is that for reusing that again when you define something next?
So there's a few value for that. One is it actually finished doing all its thinking, and it's asking me, hey, this will be a comprehensive production-ready design document that you can hand for a developer for implementation. Would you like to proceed? And I say, yes, create this file for me. So it's gonna create this file. And so it depends on how much time you have, right? Sometimes I don't have time to go back and forth with Claude on certain. Well, here it is. Well, this is not the one it's working on. It's finishing that one. But here's an old one I had it do a long time ago for the character location design feature implementation. So it has a summary for the different phases. It has a technical implementation. It has a JSON structure, etc. And I will basically go back and forth with it a little bit on, is this the direction I want it to go? Sometimes I read through it and I'm like, oh, this is like too complicated. And sometimes it gives 3 options and I'm like, pick option 2. You certainly don't have to put it in a Markdown file. You can just go back with it in the terminal. One reason to put it in a Markdown file is you can then go to a different agent like Gemini. So here I have Gemini in VS Code. And what you can do is like pull this Markdown file, because now it's stored. Like, let me just make sure it's working. Read this research that was done by a developer. So I'm going to be like, I don't know why it's not working. I'm not able to pull the location there. But I would tell Gemini, basically like, read this and then review the document. Like you can ask, like you can review it for security purpose. Like, are there other options? What are potential bugs that can come up? So you can just kind of like ask Gemini, like a different agent, to review this implementation research document. And then sometimes Gemini like will come up with like, they missed this thing, or like this schema is not consistent across this, like it should be consistent this way. And I'll be like, oh yeah, those are good points. Like I didn't think about that. And then I can tell Claude, or you can tell Gemini like, okay, fix the plan and make sure this is incorporated.
So it's really LLM evaluating LLMs.
Yes.
Very nice.
But you can also give it to a developer. Like if you have a developer friend, you're like, here, this is the research, and you don't feel like it's very clear for you, like you don't feel like you're experienced enough to make that technical decision, you can just give it to a developer then and ask them for an opinion. But because this is like a stage where you are trying to get the architecture correct, then you may want to spend more time on it, because like as you build, it will be harder if the architecture, isn't set up right sometimes. So it depends on the feature, right? You're not always going to like do this whole exercise. A lot of times people are going to, I'm already like in the middle of something. Like, I wonder if I can just, I don't know, we'll see. Maybe it actually saw the location of the file. I'm not sure. But Claude, when you're not in that, I don't know if it's going to break it, but see how I shift tab? Oh, you probably didn't see me. I shift tab and I went to this mode, which is like the default mode. Then it's kind of like the lovable input that you're used to. If you don't want to go through this whole plan mode process, you just like type in your prompt, build a UI based on blah, or build this personal finance budget app, and here's like the 4 features I want, right? Like just go in here and type that out, and then it will, start building the files for you.
So this is very technical, and your technical prowess is a lot higher than myself, and actually very close to that of a developer. How did you learn all of this about Claude Code?
For Claude Code specifically, I did what most people did. I, obviously was testing it myself a little bit, but over time, like I would go online and read some subreddits, like Claude AI subreddit. There's a bunch of like different subreddits. I follow different newsletters, like, Peter Yang has a newsletter, although I think I was working on Claude Code before he published his Claude Code stuff. But yeah, I would just go online and search for things. Anthropic's website, I would just go on their website and read some of their documentation. Yeah, I really should watch more YouTube videos. I'm not very good about watching YouTube channels. I like reading something, or if I hit a problem, I just like search for it, and then like I'll just do it myself and test it.
So there's no one real document. It's more so use the knowledge available to us today, which is, it can be on a social media site, it could be on a website, it could be on an LLM. So you're just using from all types of avenues, is what you're saying.
Yeah, that's right. I just try to build something, and when I have a problem, I just look it up. As I was building it, I was like, oh, it's taking too long to do this or that. And I just search for it. Is there better workflows to do X, Y, Z? But like I mentioned, actually, Anthropic's website has a bunch of tips and things like that. They also had a conference, and so they did some like Claude Code videos for that. So yeah, just combining all that together. I wouldn't call myself a very expert Claude Code user either. I think I'm okay. I can kind of work my way around things. There's a lot of people who are really deep into it.
This is excellent information. And then let's move over to lessons learned.
This walkthrough was really helpful. This helps me go and give it a hand and try what you said. I think this was inspiring. And what are the real practical tips that you could give us? And what is that something you wished you knew about it before you actually started implementing this? So any takeaways or anything you would do differently?
Yeah, I would do a lot of different things differently. But I think the one that I want to highlight, and I touched on earlier, is like how important the architecture of your code matters. When I started building with Claude, I followed, some of the basic best practices for just vibe coding in general, right? Like write out a spec, make sure you do like one small feature at a time. And a lot of that works really well if you're just building a prototype, right? A prototype that you just want to quickly show and you're willing to throw away the code. But if you want to build an app that you can ship in production, or something that just like has a lot of features that's more complex, then the architecture is going to matter a lot. So I personally actually realized too late how important that is, and a lot of the code in my app actually ended up kind of being more like spaghetti code. There were just a lot of redundant functions, and the prompt was kind of scattered all the place. So I actually had to do some refactoring there. And then, if you look at app.py, this particular file, this is like the worst offense in the app, which is like 3,000 long file, because, it just kept building. I kept building more and more features. And I wasn't paying attention. So bad that if you ask Claude to try to read app.py and just like explain the code base, what's going to happen is that it's going to fail. It's not going to be able to read this file because the file is just too big for it to read. It's this massive 3,000 line file, and it's going to, hit an error. That's something to keep in mind. The other bit, aside from just like screwing up Claude and not being able to read the file, is your plan for a lot of these vibe coding apps is usually primarily token based. After you use a certain amount of tokens, you're going to get rate limited, and Claude or whatever is going to be like, oh, you run out of credits, or hey, you got to stop now. Yeah. And so when you first build a app, it's very fast and it's really easy because the agent there's no code. It doesn't have to read through a lot of different lines of code to build something. So all your features are going to get built really quickly. As your app grows, right, and you've got a lot more lines of code, you've got a lot more files, it's just going to be a lot slower and harder to build if you don't have clean code. Right? It's going to be a lot harder to debug because, like, if you have some redundant functions, like which function is breaking, you don't know. You're going to have to look through all of them. But if you're just prototyping, it doesn't matter. The architecture doesn't matter. You can just, build something, throw away the code. It really only matters if you want to build a bigger project.
Nice. This is a very different approach from the other tools, I'd say. Well, that's a discussion for another day. So having said that, Bonnie, now that you have a code base and you have something running, how did you evaluate this? Because it has another layer of complexity, as it's not very subjective. It's not very objective. You have a lot of creativity involved. How do you evaluate an application like this?
It definitely feels a little bit harder sometimes, because there's a lot of great posts, firstly, and tutorials about AI eval. And I actually wrote a post myself that references those blog posts. So yeah, if you go to the top, there's Hamel, there's Peter Yang, Mahesh has a community session on it. So there's a lot of like posts on it already. But for a lot of them, they were kind of focused on kind of more of a customer service agent type evaluation. And it felt a little different for me because a lot of the questions felt a little more straightforward, like did the agent make a product detail? Whereas for this one, it was a lot more subjective, but the approach was very similar. It's just that you had to get comfortable with the fact that you are going to be evaluating based on more subjective type questions like, is this story engaging for a child? So maybe that's the question. And, that evaluation, that the answer is going to come down a little bit to taste, right? Whether that's the subject matter or, if you're the product manager, and you need to get comfortable dealing with that subjectivity. So here, the approach is very similar to a lot of the other tutorials, but I started with the error analysis, which is basically a fancy term for look at your AI output and write some error notes about them. So here, I have AI output from some stories. So there's a sentence: the dragon exhibited an enormous wingspan, illustrating its grandiosity and terrifying magnificence. And for the notes, I wrote, well, the vocabulary is too advanced and it's kind of awkward for kids. And so you do this across like a bunch of different AI outputs. And from there, you'll probably notice there's some trend in terms of the type of errors it's showing. In my case, I was able to quickly tell there were some issues with the vocabulary being too advanced, and sometimes with the sentence structure, for example. So those two eventually became part of the eval questions I used. So does the story build naturally and remain engaging for a first to third grader? Is the vocabulary used naturally in the sentence? So that those two are questions that I built like a rubric in terms of what bad, average, and good means, right? So if you're looking at that question of does the story build naturally and remain engaging for a first to third grader, bad might be like the story feels disjointed or confusing, like the events don't logically follow one another, or there's some new detail appear without setup. Maybe average is the story mostly makes sense and holds a child's attention, but pacing or transition could be smoother. So I have a definition for bad, average, and good, which I use to then label the different AI output.
How many responses did you have to label to come up with these kind of patterns?
In terms of the error analysis, I probably did 50 of them. You can do more, you can do less. I think Hamal like do 100. It just depends on your time. And then, once you've kind of done that error analysis, I came up with these questions, because then you have to, do the questions and get the AI output and put it in a CSV, and I have each of the questions that I then label as good, average, and bad. And then from there, I calculated the percent of good, average, bad for each of the questions. And I could see, there's one question: does the LM give directional guidance for writing the next part of the story? The result wasn't as good as I'd like. Bad was 17%. So I can go back to the prompt and update that aspect of it so it can get improved. So that's kind of how you can identify with what you want to fix in your AI. And just one quick note about the labeling. I did bad, average, and good. I know like Hamal says, and Shreya says like you should just have like a yes or no kind of, a true false. I have my reasons for doing this. Kind of feel like there's a lot of gradient with the storytelling, and I'm okay that there's some average. Sometimes the paragraphs are going to be average and some are going to be good. But I wanted to see what that gradient looked like. So that's kind of why I did that.
This is so time consuming because you have to do that process, go back, and you need to reiterate on your prompt. Once you run it, you have to again redo the entire process again. So how do you kind of scale this whole thing?
I haven't scaled to thousands of responses yet. So I don't have battle-tested advice here. The resources I mentioned earlier, they go deeper into doing programmatic evals and LM as a judge type of approach. I can certainly see how an LM as a judge could help with labeling maybe grammar and spelling accuracy issues or safety violation. But for more subjective criteria, is the story engaging for a child? I suspect I will just end up sampling. I would just randomly sample X amount of like AI output and then label those responses to further improve the app. So that's kind of my thinking right now. I haven't actually reached that scale yet.
Nice. Is there anything else about AI that you want to call out evals that you want to call out before we wrap up?
At the end of the day, evals are just a analysis tool. And one potential crack in this tool is that it is labeled by very few people, potentially one product manager or one subject matter expert or one tastemaker. And that can that does introduce bias, right? It's just one person making all these decisions. But at the end of the day, like for your product, what you really care about is, are you solving your customers' problems? Are you getting real user outcomes from your product? So how do you make sure the customer feedback is included in this loop, in this evaluation loop of analyzing your AI and making improvements to the agent? As a product leader, if I'm doing this sort of eval analysis, I want to make sure my teams are still including that customer feedback in the product life cycle, so that if your eval scores are going up, you want to make sure that the kids are actually enjoying writing and improving as well, and they're not getting discouraged for some reason, right? And there's many ways to do that, right? One way is that you have your eval metrics, which are going to go up and down. You also have your customer metrics, right? And you'll need to decide that for your individual app, whether that's engagement or the learning metric you might have. And in my case, it might be like, how many sentences are they writing? Are their reading and writing levels going up, for example? So does that align with each other? Another thing that you might consider doing is, in the labeling CSV sheet, I could have another column where you might have responses from the customer who is rating the AI agent. So if you rate something as bad, is your customer also saying that it's bad? Are you aligning with your customer? So that's the main thing I want to call out. I know like AI evals has been really a big topic, and there's a lot of information on the how to actually do the AI eval. But as a product person, I want to just make sure that we're still focusing on the customer, and we're still going to be able to get those customer improvements that we're looking for.
But first, Bonnie, just to summarize the AI first portion of the product, is that you used ChatGPT or LLM to create the visual assets. You then integrated it into the actual app itself through Claude Code, had Claude Code be your developer to create the application. Is that a very high level explanation of the product?
Yeah, that's right. That's a good high level explanation of my workflow to build this product.
Awesome.
That's incredibly insightful, Bonnie. I think your perspective of considering the customer feedback upfront and being more proactive about it makes so much sense. So I love that thought process. And Bonnie, this whole conversation was amazingly insightful. And thank you so much for all the insights you shared today. And no wonder you got the most innovative use of AI. I love your product and I'd love to use it for my son. And I'm sure you push the boundaries here. And I must say, very inspiring. And thank you so much for this, Bonnie. Thank you.
So Bonnie, if listeners want to see more, where can they find your work?
You can always find me on LinkedIn. You can search for Bonnie Yu. I also have a website, bonnieyu.com, and I can share with you my coaching email if you want to share with other listeners if they're interested in connecting with me and they're looking for some product coaching.
Oh, certainly. It'd be very valuable and lucky to have you.
Thank you.
And we'll definitely put that information in the description below for people to reference. But with that, thank you so much, Bonnie, for your time. This is a lot of information and definitely gives me more insight and drive to learn more about Claude Code. What about you, Pooja?
Absolutely. I can't agree more than that, Ryan. I've always found Claude Code to be so intimidating, so I run to other no-code tools, but this has got the ball rolling for me and I should give it a try. I will do that soon. And Bonnie, I'm going to reach out to you and give you my feedback and my experience with it soon.
Thank you guys so much for having me on today. I had a lot of fun sharing, and I really hope that this helps out other people in their AI journeys.
Thank you so much, Bonnie.
Thank you.
Thank you.